just have it open at the same time so I can see that it's working properly. And it should be up momentarily. I haven't done this on my office computer, so this is going to be interesting to see how well it goes.
Well, I might have to play around with this for my classes, because I record them and I put them on YouTube, but live streaming makes sense.
I found that live streaming is better because these files can get very big, and my computer was very mad at me for that. All right, just have it open at the same time so I can see that it's working properly, and then I mute the YouTube and let it go. That way I can also, it hasn't really ever happened, but watch for comments. But okay, I see that we are up and running, so we can get started. So, as I said, we're just going to introduce have each person introduce themselves. It's been a while since I've done one of these, apparently, but we will get started. So thank you everyone for coming today. This is our Popular Culture Dialogue for, I guess, the end of August, beginning of September. It's that weird week here. But this was voted upon by everyone on Twitter, and they wanted to hear a discussion about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. That's fascinating, a topic that tries to understand kind of where that line is between appropriation and not giving or not being aware of the issues associated with it, and then appreciation. And given the globalized nature of popular culture these days and the ways in which people can be influenced from so many different cultures, this is a rather big issue these days. So we wanted to bring together several people to talk about it, to think through some of these issues, and maybe even have suggestions for what could be research projects in the future. So we're going to just have everyone introduce themselves briefly, and I'm going to start with our newbie to the dialogues, and that would be Debbie. Debbie, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Debbie Seacrest. I'm a math professor, and I also teach choir here at a small university in Montana. And I'm an Air Force brat, so I've grown up all over the country, lived in Germany for a while as well. And as someone who's Jewish, as someone who's non-binary, I have some experience with both of those, cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And I'm really excited to join you and share and hear more from other people.
Wonderful. I love the background. I think this is also the first time we've had a math professor on. So I think that's fascinating to hear from that perspective too. So thank you for being here, Debbie. And then we're going to go over to returning guest Princess.
Hi, I'm Princess. I'm not a math professor. I hate math. I was totally bad at it. I'm from St. Lucia, and I have degrees in history and English and religion, and certification in public history and medieval religion. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here again, Princess.
No problem.
And Dean, I know you said that you don't really have a lot to say in this subject, but I think you actually do. So please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dean. I'm kind of more in a supporting role today, but I'm also trans and non-binary and disabled, so I might have something to say, but I'm more here to learn about how to do this, and I'm really glad and thankful that you're all here.
As am I. And I do think maybe that an interesting place to start off with then would be just that idea of the cultural aspect of cultural appropriation and appreciation. I think oftentimes this topic is discussed in terms of nationality, ethnicity, race, and so forth. But is there ways in which we could see the concepts applying to different ideas about what culture is as well? Who'd ever like to jump in on that? Do you have any thoughts?
I think I understood your question, but I'm not 100% sure. Could you rephrase it, please?
Well, it's this idea that, okay, so oftentimes when we think culture, we're thinking about, oh, say, there's been a lot of issues like cultural appropriation and the indigenous people in the United States, like Halloween costumes, or you look at people like Katy Perry who have appropriated Japanese cultural aspects. So a lot of times we focus on this idea of national and ethnic and so forth for culture, but other ways that we can think of culture where maybe appropriation is coming in, like religion or gender identity or sexuality and things like that. Is appropriation an issue in any of those types of cultural exchanges?
I think all of them.
Hmm.
It also makes me think of one point you mentioned the Halloween, which made me think of it. I had a karate class on Halloween, and so we were walking down the street in our gis and our belts, our karate uniforms, and someone asked if we were dressed up for Halloween.
Mm.
And when I see people, I'm okay with someone dressing up with a gi with a white belt, showing that they're a novice. But when they have a black belt and they haven't earned a black belt, that's something that stands out to me. And I'm not sure if that's my perspective as someone who's been doing karate since they were young, or if that's kind of if that's something that other people would feel the same way about. I'm not really sure.
Princess?
Well, I have to agree with Debbie on this one, especially cultural appropriation can happen with religion too, all of them, especially like Christian. Some Christian denominations love to have Jewish Christian Passover and send feathers, and so, but it's not the same. You culturally appropriating this person's religion, so you have to.
I also think, talking about religious appropriation, I think about like how in the United States in the 1960s, the hippie movement appropriating so many Eastern philosophy and religious items and having little Buddhas and everything all over the place, not even understanding like the religious significance of those icons.
And having a Christian's Passover Seder is celebrating Jesus, the Jews, and Jesus as the Messiah. Jews don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. So how can you appropriate their religion to suit you? And it also happens with race.
Mhm.
Also, I mean, no offense to Kim Kardashian, but she's the Kardashians are the biggest culprits of it. And the magazines feed them, the media feed them. Like Kim Kardashian had a pat in her hair, and they were acting like she invented that pat, but Aaliyah had it for generations, or for years. Aaliyah, if you know the singer, may she rest in peace, Aaliyah, that's her signature hairstyle. So I think I agree with Debbie, all of it.
Okay.
When I was in undergrad, we had some people who put up decorations, and I really appreciated the intent of trying to be inclusive, but hanging a paper menorah on the Christmas tree was not quite accomplishing the goal that I know that they had, that I know was, a good goal. And I did appreciate that when, I kind of pointed this out, it was, we're sorry, what do you think we should do? Should we move the menorah over here? Should we take it off completely? And just kind of giving some of that agency back to someone who is a part of that culture, I thought was a really good way to respond.
Cool. Yeah. I think we should get into like the definition of appropriation and how it differs from celebration or appreciation. But before we do, I just wanted to see if, Dean, if you have anything you want to add about like how different types of cultures could be appropriated.
And I definitely agree that a lot of different kind of cultures can be appropriated. And I found it in fan fiction, which is kind of a culture of mine that means more for me than a lot of my like ancestry. And when a bunch of the most privileged play around with it, it really bothered me.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I mean, I think that's important, and I think that's a thing that needs to be looked at and like dealt with.
Mhm.
But I really, really don't want to. That is less important than like real cultural appropriation, or that's less important than when it has to do with race, with religion. It's just, it's important, but it's, yeah, I would not want to, speak over those more important voices.
I think that's a valid point. I also though think, especially if we're thinking about like fans doing it, I think there's, definitely the issues that could come from race, religion, and I do think even like queer culture as well being appropriated can be an issue when fans are doing that. But I also think, and it's interesting you bring up fan cultures being appropriated, the extent to which corporations are doing the cultural appropriation, I think is something important to think about too, because that kind of gets at this normalization aspect of cultural appropriation, where you have, the Kardashians being lauded as the originators of something that they definitely are not. So to dive more into even the corporate versus an individual type of appropriation, let's like maybe define what we mean by appropriation versus appreciation going forward. Would anyone like to say how they see that distinction?
Yeah, I would like to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Princess.
It's okay. I like to define it. There's a thin line between appropriation and appreciation, but I believe that appropriation is if you have wearing box braids as a woman and you are lauded by the media and everybody, and even yourself say that you invented it, that's appropriation. And not understanding the history of why Black women had to wear braids. So, but you can be appreciative. You can appreciate the culture, but there is a thin line, because sometimes some of my white friends have a problem with it, have a problem trying to navigating through the cultural appropriation and the appreciation. So some of them will ask me if it's okay singing, rapping Kanye West or Tupac or Kendrick Lamar. If it's okay for them to like that music. And I'm always saying, yes, it's okay for you to like that. It's a different story when you are saying the nigger word or you go to the N word. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying it either. And you go to a Halloween party dressed up in blackface as Kanye West, Tupac, or Kendrick Lamar, or Dr. Dre.
Debbie?
Just to kind of piggyback off of that point, it made me think about Halloween and kind of how do we, again, this distinction seems like a very fine distinction. Gender and race have a lot of things that are similar and a lot of things that are completely different. Our oldest is non-binary, but when they were 4, they were identifying as a boy. And what do you want to be for Halloween? They and their little sister both wanted to be Elsa. So we got 2 Elsa costumes and it was adorable. But at that time we had a boy, or, we had someone identifying as a boy dressed up as Elsa, as a woman. So I just feel like it's an interesting question of, I did not feel like that was at all, cultural appropriation. So again, where do we draw the line? I don't think that it's appropriate to show up in blackface to a Halloween party, but with different identities, what's okay, what's not. And I think the best way that I have of kind of thinking about it in my own head is, how would people of this group feel about it?
Mhm.
And, one of the biggest issues with that, not only do you not know if you're not part of that group, but you don't know if you are part of that group. I can't speak for how all non-binary people feel. I can't speak for how all Jewish people feel. So even if I think that what you're doing is completely appropriate, is celebrating my culture and so on, that doesn't mean someone else in that same group is going to feel the same way. So I feel like I'm not answering things at all. I'm just throwing a bunch more questions.
And I think that's, appropriate for when we're talking about this issue, because there is both kind of that larger issue of appropriate versus appreciation, but like you were just saying, it does kind of also come down to a personal acceptance level or tolerance level, I guess maybe is another way to think of it. On the one hand, it might be that their big issue with appropriation is when especially white people are doing something from a different ethnicity or race or culture than the one that they are a member of, because they think it's cool, because it's different, it's unique, it's that horrible word exotic. And they're not really trying to learn more about it, and they're not trying to gain more of an understanding of the history associated with it, or the power issues related with the fact of them doing it and the history of colonization and everything horrible there. But then it is that matter of, well, okay, if someone has done all of that and they are aware of all of these issues that might come with it, and they appreciate the culture, so they want to show their appreciation by some way engaging with the culture. But then what happens when people who don't know that person see them doing so? And it's very tricky. How have you navigated that in the past? Have you had experiences where you've had to navigate that?
One thing that brings to mind for me is people putting pronouns in their email signature, which at first to me signified this is someone who understands pronouns, gender, is going to be supportive, and so on. But now I see some people who are doing it who don't really understand why they're doing it. They're just doing it because they were told to, or because they're copying other people. And, that no longer means I see your pronouns in your email signature, and I have a fairly safe bet that you're going to know what I mean when I say I use they, them pronouns. But at the same time, I do feel supported that people are realizing that it's not just the other who should be identifying themselves. It's everyone. It's not just our responsibility. As trans people, let's, we're the only ones who need to worry about pronouns. So I think that's a case where I feel like, really exactly what you said. If they are throwing pronouns in there because everybody else does without any understanding of why, that's appropriation. If they're putting their pronouns in there because they are learning about things, they're celebrating differences and so on, even if they're not, super well informed, but if they're, well intentioned and trying to learn, I guess I feel that that's appreciation. And I don't know, I'd be interested what other people think about that.
Princess or Dean, you want to hop in on that?
Yes, it's a hard thing to navigate. I personally haven't experienced it, but I know people who have, particularly white friends. When I was in California, there was a Halloween party at my school, and I went as a goddess, of course, and my friend showed up with her boyfriend. She showed up as Lil Kim in black. No, she showed up in black. She showed up as Lil Kim with grills and everything, and her boyfriend showed up as Biggie Smalls with it was blackface, but you could still, it wasn't it wasn't blackface at the same time. It wasn't a lot of blackface, but it was still blackface. So it was a whole mess. I could see why everybody was like, none of our mutual black friends spoke to her again after that.
Mm.
But I did not see her as being cultural appropriated because she wasn't in blackface. I
Mhm.
saw him as being culturally appropriate, but our mutual black friends were saying that she had the grills, and then she still came with him to the party, so she is being cultural appropriated. Because we know, if you know the story about Lil Kim and Biggie, they were having an affair while he was married to Faith Evans. So all that backstory and history is like, and coming to this Hollywood party was not. But I didn't see anything wrong with it. So again, bringing up to not everybody in the same community will agree on it. I saw her boyfriend as being cultural appropriated, but I didn't see her as being cultural appropriated.
Right.
So it's a hard thing to navigate, knowing whether one is being culture appropriated or appreciating culture. I guess it depends on the individual, but also it also depends on the general consensus of that particular group. So we know the general consensus of yes, there are Black people that disagree, but the general consensus of Black people is that you don't do blackface. And I think I'm assuming that the general consensus of Jewish people that you don't do Christian Passover senders. I'm assuming. So I guess yes, it's based on individual, but also there is also a general consensus.
And to me, in terms of having a Seder, I think it's a little complicated because the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. So Passover does have some history in Christianity as well, but I'm not sure how much of, a Christian Passover Seder is actually tying back to the roots of a Seder. I went to a combination Seder, I suppose, at one point where we had a Jewish rabbi who was kind of talking about things, explaining things, and a Christian pastor, I think, who, was also up there, and kind of the two of them were talking about the connections, which was interesting. We have this in common. Most of the people there were Christian. There were a few of us Jews who would join in with the rabbi when we're singing a song or doing a prayer, but it was interesting seeing how the community is connected. And to me, it felt appropriate because we had the rabbi there. It was a true attempt to learn and appreciate the culture. But you're absolutely right. There are times when there is no real connection to kind of the meaning behind whatever it is that we're looking at.
Yeah, because I know, like, I'm not religious. My family was Catholic. I work at a Catholic university. And from that perspective, the way that I hear Catholics talking about the Last Supper is essentially just in communion. So there isn't any other real religious significance to the Last Supper except for the story of Judas and then, communion. So it's interesting that to hear that you might have Christians who are engaging with Passover without being more aware of the cultural significance of it. But I do love that idea, or what you said is that experience of kind of like a dialogic approach where different cultures would come together over a common point and further explore the commonalities that they have.
And And further explore the differences too. I think both of them, it makes me think of that question, compare and contrast. Got to get both sides and you learn a lot more.
Yeah, because we have to remember, it's not a bad thing to be different from each other. I teach communication, and in 2 of my communication classes this week, Monday, I said, if it wasn't for the fact that we were different from each other, we wouldn't communicate with each other. And just think about what this world would be like if we never had to talk to each other. And they were like, oh, yeah, no. So then it becomes part of the question of, well, how do we do the cultural exchange? How do you work to find common ground? And I think part of it too is kind of going back to what Princess was saying, is if the people who maybe are doing what they see as appreciation, but others see as appropriation, if those people aren't chagrined by when the people feel offended, if they're like, kind of double down and they're like, oh, well, you're such a snowflake and those types of things, that's a problem. And that suggests maybe it was more cultural appropriation. Or is it that the people were just, they're uncomfortable that they made other people uncomfortable, and so they rationalized it, well, it's not their fault that they offended someone, it's that someone else's fault for being offended. I mean, do you have any ideas as to how to negotiate and handle those types of interactions?
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Oh, I'm really, really done with being nice about that stuff. Nope, I don't care. You did something wrong. Be an adult person and be accountable. Do what you can to minimize damage. Apologize. Don't make it about yourself.
I'm with Dean. I'm tired of being apologized. I'm tired of being nice, and sometimes used to end up apologizing to these they're the snowflakes. I'm sorry. Before being offended, but they need to start acting like an adult, apologize, and go and read. I don't have to do the work for you. You can, I say that you offended me, you need to go and look up why blackface or box braids is offensive to me as a Black person, and go and look up the history. And then come back and apologize. And actions too. I need to see things. I'm not going to quickly forgive you. I need to see that you as a white person, not necessarily a white person, because there are Asians who, because of the divide and conquer by the colonialists, and Native indigenous people and other races that hate on Black people. So you go and do the work. I need to see the actions, and then come back to me, and we can talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I'm dealing with people online, I end up losing it, and I need to take a break because some of them online are really trolls.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's I'm usually right there. Let me explain it to you. I try to explain to people that, again, we're not all uniform, and it's not the same for every situation. I might have some situation where it's just, you should know better, just go out and educate yourself, or others where, especially in, a fairly rural part of Montana, I'm not surprised that you don't know this, and you might not even know where to begin. It makes me think of, looking things up in a paper dictionary, and it's like, does that start with a C or an S? I don't know, so I can't look it up. So giving the guidance that feels right for you and keeping in mind your audience. I think it's most important to really protect yourself, though, whether that's, I just can't handle it, or even I'm not even going to engage. I'm just going to smile and nod and be misgendered and leave it because I just don't have the capacity right now
Mhm.
to do anything. Our oldest decided to use they, them pronouns at school recently, which starts in a week. And when we were talking with various people, they were told, they were told that it's against the law to talk about their pronouns, which it is not, and that they could go talk to the principal about it. And my kid's 9. It's against the law. Am I going to be arrested? I have to go talk to the principal. And I said, the principal is in the wrong here, but that doesn't mean that you need to go educate him. If you don't want to talk to the principal, you don't talk to the principal. If you don't want me to talk to the principal, I don't talk to the principal. It's, I think the most important thing is figuring out what works for you.
Mhm.
And again, kind of protecting yourself and moving on from there. You put on your own oxygen mask first and all that.
Which I think then is like maybe where we can bring more popular culture discussion into this, because some,
Can I just say a thing?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say that we've been talking about like really, really kind options all around. And I want to say that just yelling your head off at someone is totally a legitimate reply. And like, I would take it if somebody wanted to yell at me if I made a mistake like that. And like, I don't want to leave out that that is totally legitimate and important, and like people deserve to do it.
yes. And
That's a really good point. I think it's, we're kind of socialized to make other people happy, and especially when we're in a marginalized identity, do I want to rock the boat or whatever you want to think about? And yeah, sometimes you need to flip the boat over. You need to, really make an impact to be heard.
Princess, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to say, as a Christian, I believe in flipping over tables and flipping over. Because, to change the status quo, to have the conversation, you need to flip over those tables. That's
Can't always turn the other cheek when,
No.
both cheeks are getting hit.
even Jesus knew that. That's why he flipped tables.
Exactly. Well, so what do we see then as maybe popular culture's relationship to this? Because oftentimes we think of popular culture as, especially these days, mediated messages coming to us through television and films and social media and so on and so forth. And there's not a great history of cultural appreciation in Hollywood at the very least. So there's that idea of, maybe people learn about cultures through the media. We know there's a lot of issues like around anime and manga and cultural appropriation there. But then again, those types of texts can help open up people's eyes to what does exist outside of what they experience every day. So like if you are in rural Montana and you have the internet connection, you're like, oh, wait, I'm not that weird for liking this thing. And there's other stuff out there than just what is in my immediate area. So what do you think about how popular culture relates to this topic?
I think that popular culture is the biggest cultural appropriation. That musicians, actors, filmmakers, all of them. Tom Cruise starred in that movie called The Last Samurai. And if I didn't know who Tom Cruise was, because there are Japanese Americans with English names, I would have thought, oh, okay, this is about a Japanese samurai, and he's the last of his kind. And then, or maybe I'll think about, okay, Tom Cruise is this American person is going to help out this Japanese last samurai, but it ended up being he's the last samurai, if I remember the movie right, you know? And then you have singers like Madonna. She's big on cultural appropriation. You know, whether you're Black or Asian, you know, in the 90s, late 90s, she went through this big Asian phase. And I think she was a practitioner of this Jewish mysticism thing called Kabbalah. And so she has been doing that. But at the same time, she's also helped different communities. So it's kind of a catch-22. Do you call out this person for being cultural appropriative, or do you leave them alone because they're helping different communities? And then there's this white rapper, Iggy Azula. She was accused for being cultural appropriation because she's Australian and she's rapping in a Southern Black accent.
Mm.
And so that's a big issue with her. And then, you know, there was this thing about her being a white Australian who came into the US illegally, but she just got to pay fines. But if somebody who's of the Mexican or Black ethnicity or nationality, they will be deported. So cultural appropriation does link with other issues in the world. And pop culture, yeah, they're good for that. Although there was this show called Switch at Birth.
Mm.
And I think it was the final season dealt with the issue. The one of the girls out there is deaf, Daphne, and she's going to college, and her boyfriend at the time appears in a Lil Wayne with grills and blackface in a Lil Wayne costume, and her Black best friend was upset, and they started a petition, and so she and her Black best friend were at odds, but eventually
You gotta freeze.
she eventually understood. So it's Hollywood and popular culture, most of they're the biggest perpetrators. So
Yeah, it's kind of like Hollywood is,
I don't think they help the situation at all.
no. I mean, Hollywood has the kind of been the extension for a long time, it seems, of Western colonialism. And then the extent to which it then imposes cultural imperialism and all of that happens as well. I don't think Hollywood has properly dealt and reconciled with that type of history. Debbie?
It makes me think about when I see a movie and like it, and then I say, you know, oh, I think I'm going to read the book, because maybe the movie isn't great, but it introduces me to the idea, but maybe they should just make the movie better. So, you know, if we're introduced to a culture based on a bad representation of that culture, like, I mean, I'm glad I'm being introduced so that I can learn more that's accurate, but it seems like there are just better ways to go about it, such as talking to people in that, you know, cultural group. But I think it's also, it can be really hard to figure out, again, kind of what is an appropriate introduction and what isn't. In, you know, in choir, we might sing a piece in Latin, we might sing a piece in French, and so on. So, you know, we're not French, but we're introducing you to, you know, this really cool song. But when I first got to this school, we were doing some, you know, songs, sort of the traditional sort of freedom hymns, songs, whatever it is, in terms of, you know, Underground Railroad and so on. And so then you have Black culture, and, you know, I really wasn't sure if, where do you draw the line? If French is okay, why do I feel a little less comfortable
Mhm.
sort of appropriating, appreciating whatever it is, Black culture? And to me, I could be wrong, it feels like because around here, you know, or at least United States, we have a lot of Black people, we don't have a lot of French people. And that's not necessarily a good rationale for why it feels different for me, but that's kind of the best explanation I can come up with for why it feels different. And I think it's also a question of kind of who you have available to introduce people. If you have, you know, I want to do, so for example, we had a play that we put on here at our university, and our town is almost completely white. And it was a really good play that was grappling with racism. And we had a white actress playing a Black character because, like, we literally did not have enough Black characters to have a Black person playing the Black character. And so, again, you know, I felt like it was an important play. It got a lot of messages across. And it definitely was sort of the, here's this introduction to this, you know, display of racist behaviors back in whenever it was set. Some are still here, some are not. But because we did not have Black actors, we had a white person playing a Black person, which, when you're talking about racism and you're watching the play, it's good content, but is it okay to express it when you don't have, I guess, kind of the materials, not that I want to think of people as materials, but the means to express it in a way that is meaningful? I feel like I'm kind of losing my words here, but if you want to portray the message and you don't have the people to portray the message accurately, is it okay? Is it good to still get something across, or should you not, unless you can do, you know, a really strong performance, really strong job?
Yeah, I mean, we come at this from, in like popular culture studies, we talk about it maybe from a semiotic perspective, and the idea that we have all of these signs around us, these symbols that have been created and imbued with meaning, and we've constructed gender and race similarly so that we associate certain meaning with certain symbols. So if the communication of the meaning is dependent upon specific signs, and it is not possible to convey those signs, then that can impact how people understand what is trying to be done there. Dean?
I think for me, the difference between, I don't, okay, I'm sure this is more complicated than I understand, especially when we're talking about the States. But for me, I'm kind of comfortable appropriating French culture because French people colonized where I live and are in a position of power and are not systemically oppressed. So, and I think the the actions speak louder than words. Like the way we do things is more of a message than the words we say. So, I mean, it's always complicated, but surely there are better ways.
Well, and it gets kind of at this idea of exploitation, because that's, you know, that was what colonialism was a lot about. It was just dehumanization and exploitation. And the fact that if cultural appropriation is resulting in this exploitation being maintained, that is a big problem, because we should be past that at this point. And that's why I also mentioned this idea of like fan cultures being appropriated. In some way, that's about exploitation too, especially if it's done by like Disney or these larger corporations in order to make money and gain more power in the world. I mean, that's not exactly a good thing either, because it's exploitation.
That's a really good point about the differences that I wasn't quite able to put my finger on. So thank you, Dean.
I missed it because my internet was giving trouble, but I got Dean's part, and I got part of Debbie's. But what was the conversation, the question about?
So I kind of brought it up in terms of our choir, where, you know, we might sing a song in French, and to me that felt okay. But when you have an all-white choir singing a traditionally Black song, that felt very different from a choir full of people who aren't French singing a French song. And I was trying to kind of understand why that was. And I think sort of I was just kind of fishing around trying to figure it out. And I think Dean put that really well.
Oh, yeah, I'm with Dean on that. I will rather appropriate the French than, because the French and the British did colonize where I'm from, and you know, they did enslave my ancestors. So I'm rather would focus. They're the ones in power still. So I rather focus on appropriate them than a Black person or singing a Black hymn.
And that kind of brings up this interesting idea, because I think there are some, you know, Caucasians, people of European descent, white folk, that want to say that their culture is now being appropriated in various places. But if there's not that history of the power differential where white people were the minorities and we're the marginalized and we're the ones being exploited, it's not really cultural appropriation then, is it? Is that kind of what we're coming to?
But it doesn't matter whether if you're in the minority or the majority, because look at South Africa.
Mm.
You know, look at India. The British colonized India and South Africa really bad, but the Indians and Black people are the majority in these countries. So it's not necessarily about being in a minority. It's about power and money. You know, the British had the power, they had the guns, they had the money. So, but it also depends too on the white culture too. Are they accusing minorities or people of other ethnicities of being cultural appropriative, or are they accusing other white people of culturally appropriating their culture? Because I could see how they could accuse other white people. So if you are a Wicca, that is your culture. You grew up in that. You don't want all of a sudden you have this Christian witch appropriating Wicca history and symbols. So I think it also kind of depends on who they're accusing of cultural appropriation.
And that's a good point, because I think here in the United States, it's interesting that within the past 5 or so years, moonshine has become a much more common type of drink, versus the idea behind moonshine was that it was something that, you know, rednecks, hillbillies, that you made in the tub at home, and it was a very culturally specific and kind of derided as well, which is what hillbillies and, you know, rural people in Appalachia have been marginalized in terms of power for such a long time. So I don't know if those individuals from the Appalachian region would be looking at the spreading of moonshine, sometimes by larger businesses as a form of cultural appropriation, or if they see it as appreciation or not.
This is definitely a very kind of small subgroup of this question. But as someone who's been a foster parent and now an adoptive parent, I think you can also get into issues in terms of, the kid's cultural heritage and so on. So, with our training, we were taught you cannot force a child to practice your religion, et cetera, things that should be obvious, but they definitely do need to tell people. But if I have an infant and I try to use a symbol that I think is going to be meaningful for them, but I don't understand what it means, that does not feel appropriate. If it's something where I'm trying to, learn with the kid and truly learn, as opposed to let's just, stick a whatever symbol above their crib and call it good, that I think is important. It's not, intent is not enough. But it is I think a very important part of things as well.
Yeah, there's definitely that aspect of when we're talking about cultural appropriation, you have the kind of political ideology that comes in intersectionally here too, because you on the one hand might have very conservative people who are doing it and aren't aware of the issues associated with it because they haven't had the experience or the education. And then you might also have more liberal progressive individuals doing it because they think it's appreciation and they want to, I don't know, appear woke or something. But there's still that, that problem of, well, yeah, but you're still possibly doing something that is going to offend people. And it's interesting that so different in terms of politics, but they can have even that common issue of how they react when they are told that they're offending someone.
As Debbie brought up the adoption issue, some months ago, somebody I was following, and she follows me back, made a comment that she tweeted that she'd rather have an abortion than give her child to white evangelical Christians. And that caused a stir on Twitter. And then you had these white evangelical Christians saying how they adopted people of Black people, other people of color. And she was basing her statement based on all the research she's done about children, Black and other people of color children who are adopted by white Christian evangelical, even queer children, who have been adopted by white evangelical Christians, and how damaged they end up being. And she was like roasted for what she tweeted.
Did she get defensive about it?
No, she didn't get defensive, but she's trying to explain why she said it.
Okay.
But you know, some of these white Christian evangelists, they hear what they want to hear. What they heard was that she supports abortion, she supports eugenics. But what they're not hearing is about what they did not hear about the history of how white Christian evangelists oppressed Black people, Latino people when they went over the world into South America, North America, Canada, and when they took away those indigenous children and did what they did to those children. It's traumatized, it's generational trauma. So a lot of people are going to love Black and indigenous, and other people of color are going to think like her. And adoptive parents who, even though they some of the adoptees that she talked to came and help her, and some of them had nice parents, but the parents who did not know any better. So you have to, if you're going to adopt a Black or Indigenous or Jewish or queer child, you're going to have to do the research and understand what their culture symbols mean, and even adopting other white children from another culture, like people adopt children from Russia and Eastern and other places in Eastern Europe, and they come back, the children have problems, they're having problems to assimilate and all that, and sometimes they send them back, and sometimes they end up killed or whatever. So you have to do your diligence.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did mostly emergency foster care placements, meaning, we picked this kid up from their house and they need a place to stay for a few nights until we can find a more appropriate long-term situation. And we had 2 kids come to us who were Native American, and we, had to explain to our kids that, because sometimes kids would stay with us for longer, sometimes not as long, that there is something, and I'm not sure how commonly known this is. I didn't know it. I'm pretty sure this is federal, but it could be a Montana thing. I think it's federal. The Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, which states federal. Yeah. Okay. So what it says is that if you have a Native American child who needs to be removed from the home, etc., then they need to be placed with someone who is in that same tribe, if at all possible. If not, at least someone else who is Native American. We were there because, they needed a place to stay until they found a more appropriate placement, but it was not appropriate for us, given especially the history of taking Native American children away from their parents, giving them to white people to raise, to, for whatever reasons people thought that was a good idea. And so the importance of respecting those other cultures to the point where you make sure that the kids have appropriate access to people who actually, have not just some knowledge, but the lived experience. I think that's really, really important. And I'm glad you brought that point up, Princess. Thank you.
And the due diligence, the doing the research, it's something that, we would hope at some point that people have enough curiosity and feel comfortable enough doing that type of cultural exchange that is truly necessary to help with these types of situations. It'll be interesting to see the extent to which popular culture, as more diversity comes into the creation of these messages, how that helps with this situation. But popular culture, of course, can only go so far. You can only go so far with movies and books and games and so forth. And if we're also not having more specific education focused on these matters and engaging in the types of dialogue that for example, the pastor and the rabbi were doing, I think that is also going to be necessary to support any changes that might happen in popular culture, because as we all know, cultural appropriation is still happening in a lot of different places, and it's gotten better, I think, but the fact that it still exists indicates that it's not where it needs to be. So we're at the end of the dialogue here, so I just want to thank you all for coming in. There's some really great ideas here, and I learned some stuff about what's going on in the world, and the more that we can understand each other's perspectives, I'm all about that. I think that's the coolest thing in the world, is to learn about each other.
Thank you. I really appreciated the chance to, engage both in terms of these thoughts for myself, hearing other people's thoughts and getting that dialogue, that interaction, and having sort of these ideas that I can't put my finger on. And Dean is like, here's how I see it. I'm like, yes, that is it.
All right, well, thank you all. We'll talk about what our next one will be later. We do have probably mid-October, we're going to have one in relationship to the anniversary for the journal and everything, maybe coming live from the conference of Midwest Popular Culture Association. I don't know exactly yet. I should probably start thinking about that because it's 6 weeks away. So stay tuned for more, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. Let me see.